Hello, and welcome to another episode of LGOtv Big Talk. And why Big Talk? Because I hate small talk. And my guest today is none other than the incredible Whitney Johnson. She is, talk about big talk. She is a huge talker, a big thinker. I actually know Whitney because she and I are part of the Marshall Goldsmith 100 top coaches in the world. She is the CEO of WLJ Advisors and one of the 50 leading business thinkers in the world, as named by Thinkers 50. She's an expert on helping high growth organizations develop high growth individuals. She is an award-winning author, world-class speaker, frequent lecturer at Harvard Business School's corporate learning, and an executive coach and advisors to CEOs. She is a popular contributor to the Harvard Business Review, has 1.7 million followers on LinkedIn, where she was selected as a top voice in 2018. And her course, Fundamentals of Entrepreneurship, has been viewed more than 1 million times. She is a top global guru. She is, as I mentioned, one of the Marshall Goldsmith coaches, except she was one of the first and is part of the top 15 group. So I'm in the group, but she's like, what I aspire to be. She is an expert in innovation and disruption. She is the author of the best-selling Build an A-Team, Play to Their Strengths, and Lead Them Up the Learning Curve, and the critically acclaimed Disrupt Yourself, Putting the Power of Disruptive Innovation to Work. Now, this is where I want to start, at this part in your bio, because when I wrote my book, Limitless, which was all about how to redefine success, we've been sold this bill of goods our entire life that success should look like a certain thing. It's the scorecard that everybody else hands us from the outside world about what matters to us. Well, it turns out that lots of people were like, oh yeah, this redefines how I figure out what I want to do at work. And all the potential speaking clients in the corporate side and the speaking bureaus were like, we don't want to bring you in to talk to our people, because if you tell them to ignore everybody, carve their own path, and live their best life, they'll leave. And I was like, that's a corporate culture problem. So you wrote Disrupt Yourself. And I know that you had a little bit of the same reaction of people saying, well, if you're telling people to disrupt themselves, they're going to leave working for us.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we go there, though, I want to say I love your tagline. It's big talk because I hate small talk. I'm so with you on that. So I just wanted to comment on that. I'm not a small talker either. But yes, it was interesting. I remember, in fact, I remember being at a speaking event a couple of years ago, and someone came up to me and they said, "Hey, I wanted to let you know that I read your book, and now this company that I'm at where you're speaking is the new company. I left my old company because of your book." And so it does happen sometimes, but to your point, I think we're absolutely missing the broader opportunity is if we as an organization want to accelerate our growth, we're going to allow people, we're going to use this mechanism of personal disruption to allow people to do something new. So to your point as well, if you want them to continue to stay and thrive and produce on behalf of your organization, you have to remove the limits. You have to allow them to disrupt yourself. We're coming at it from different directions, but the end result is that you have people that are able to grow.
And so you wrote A-Team as a little bit of a reaction to that.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So one of the things that happened, so I wrote Disrupt Yourself. That was built on the work that I had done with Clayton Christensen. I had worked with him as an investor. For those of you who aren't familiar, he wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma. This idea of disruptive innovation, a silly little thing can take over the world. And as I was working with him, I had this big aha that this isn't just about products and services and companies and countries. It's also about people, and that you can disrupt yourself if you want to make progress. And so I wrote that initial book, and I remember reading the Boston Globe said, this is like the what color is your parachute for the entrepreneurial age? And I'm like, that's awesome. But that's really bad because now anybody inside of corporate America will not hire me to do anything. And so Build an A-Team, yeah, exactly was a response to that of saying, hey, if you want to build an A-Team, if you want to, accelerate your organizational growth, the only way you're going to be able to do that, if you don't want to churn and burn your people, is to allow them to disrupt themselves. So disruption becomes the mechanism for the growth and in terms of building a high performing team.
So this feels anathema to everything that we're taught when we're growing up, right? You are taught to display competence in something. Get hired for competence in that thing. Get better and better and better at that thing. Don't try anything else. Don't step to the right. Don't step to the left because you might fail.
Right.
But companies don't get better. People don't get better if they just stay in the same place. But we're taught that failure's finale. Like, what?
Hmm. Hmm.
God forbid you fail. And then we have Silicon Valley where it's like fail often, fail fast. But it feels like that hasn't necessarily permeated its way through the rest of the workforce.
Well, Laura, I think one of the things that happens is there are things that we all talk about and we believe and want them to be true, but that completely negates the emotional aspect of that. Yes, that's right. Theoretically, it makes a lot of sense for us to fail often and fail fast. I mean, every time you disrupt yourself or get disrupted, you are in fact failing. Or we could define it another way, we're learning. That what it does, though, or what it struggles with, is from the time that we're very, very young. If you look at the work of Carol Dweck and Heidi Grant, basically what you've got is our identity is tied to whether we succeed or fail. So from the time you and I and everybody who's listening on this was very young, it's like, oh, you got an A in that class, you're so smart. Oh, you got a C in that class, you're so dumb. And so now our identity is affixed to whether we are succeeding or failing. And so what happens for us is when we fail, yeah, fail often, fail fast. But in fact, the emotional experience that we're having is that our identity is under attack. We might be obliterated somehow. Our sense of self is obliterated. And so the challenge for us as we're thinking about disruption and failure and learning is, how do we separate out our identity, our sense of self, put it on the table or take it off the table, take our ego out of the equation and just run our life as an experiment. And so but that's so hard to do. Like, most of us need to go to therapy to do that. Certainly I did, and probably everybody else. But then once you're able to stop having that failure or moving up an S curve, stop being a referendum on you, then you're in a position where you can start to really iterate quickly and be like, top of the S curve, time to go to the bottom of a new one. I'm ready to make mistakes because my ego isn't in question. I'm just learning here. And so that's the challenge, is separating what you do from your identity and your sense of self. I need to get a drink of water.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because uh, we have an education system that tells kids that they have to get an A in math and in science and in
Mhm.
history and in English and in art and in foreign language or whatever. They have to be perfect in everything. And like you said, if you're not, you're smart, you're dumb, which translates to you're good, you're bad, you're worthy, you're unworthy.
Yeah.
And then we send them to college where they spend the first year or maybe two taking general courses, and then they go into a major where suddenly they can do something that they love. And the world doesn't expect us to be good at math and science and art and history and all those things. It expects us to be good at the thing that we like. So we go from a place of I felt so judged by not being able to, figure out the pluperfect in Spanish, to I can now, write, books in my native tongue and everything's great. There's no, maybe talking from experience here. And um and as we do that, we get to a place where we reach, we push on the boundary, we push on sort of the edge
Mhm.
of what we're capable of doing
Mhm.
in that space. And when we get good at something, we get this little glimpse of what else we can accomplish if we push ourselves and try harder. But that means going back to being a novice again.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so talk to
Absolutely.
us a little bit about the S curve that you
Yeah, I
mentioned it, but
mentioned it
let's
briefly.
dig into that.
So, yeah, so I'm still stuck on you saying pluperfect. I'm trying to remember what the pluperfect tense is in Spanish.
I
So,
mean, I could tell you, but of course, again, I didn't actually know.
it's just a tense in Spanish. We'll leave it
Yes,
at that. Okay, we'll stick with present tense.
we'll put
So
in the
the
show
S
notes.
curve, exactly. Pluperfect in Spanish in the show notes. Great idea, Laura. We're on the bottom of the S curve on that one. Okay, so S curve. So the S curve is something that was originally popularized by E.M. Rogers in 1962, and it was used to help us figure out how quickly an innovation would be adopted. Whatever the innovation was, it could be corn, it could be kindergarten, it could be whatever. And so that is something that we used in our investing with Clayton, is using the S curve to help us figure out how quickly innovations were going to be adopted, and then use that as a way to think about, should we be buying this stock now? Should we be shorting this stock now? Well, as with disruption, I had that aha that it applies not just to products, but to people. I also had a similar aha with this S curve. It could help us understand how we learn and how we grow. And so every time you start something new, and I can draw this because you can see this on the camera, you are at the base of that S. You're at the launch point. And the S curve math tells you initially it's flat. And so even though the growth is happening, it looks and feels very slow. That helps you understand, oh, I might be discouraged because it looks like nothing's happening, or I might be impatient because I want it to go faster. But then you put in that effort and you accelerate into competence and confidence. And this is that sweet spot, that steep part of the curve.
That's
where
the
you're
part
just
where people
saying,
say it feels like something clicked.
exactly. It feels exactly. Great way to describe it. Like, it's just everything is working. It's hard, but it's not too hard. And it's easy, but it's not too easy. And so you feel exhilarated. All your neurons are firing. That's the sweet spot of the curve. And then you get to the top of that S. And that's the place where you're actually really good at what you're doing. And so you're saying, okay, I know how to do it, but notice how it's the top of the S. Because you figured it out, you are no longer growing. And so you're no longer enjoying the feel good effects that come with growing, that come with learning. And so you start to get bored. And so now you have to make a decision. What are you going to do? Are you going to find a way to disrupt yourself? Disrupting can be giving yourself a challenge so that you move back down into the sweet spot, because you fundamentally really, like, for example, a CEO, they probably have to figure out a way to disrupt themselves back down onto that S curve. Gary Ridge, for example, we both know him. You may have even had him on your show. He's a person who's been in his role for 20 years. The reason he's able to do that is he gets to the top and he finds a way to challenge himself and move back down into the sweet spot of the S curve. Or you may have to jump to a brand new S curve, depending on where you are. If you don't, though, that plateau can become a precipice. And so one of the things that happens for people is you now have what I call the dilemma, the innovator's dilemma. Do I jump or do I not? Because there's risk in either place. And so if you're willing to jump, then you're going to go back down to the launch point of a new S curve, which we can talk about more. If you're not willing to jump, you might get pushed. And so one of the things that's interesting there is I actually have a hypothesis that when you lose your job, or when you get fired, when you get laid off, sometimes it's because you are at the top of your S curve and you know it, but you won't do anything about it. And so the universe gives you a nudge. And that's my hypothesis. It's anecdotal, but it seems that when I do talk to people about their experiences of being laid off or fired, which I have been, they are able to say, yeah, I kind of knew it wasn't the right S curve for me anymore. It was time for me to do something new. And this is a really good thing that happened to me. So launch point, sweet spot, high end, it's slow, fast, and slow. And then I'm going to give you a rhyme. That's how we grow. So that's the S curve. Oh, I can't hear you, Laura.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
I can relate so strongly to that. Before my current iteration of as a speaker and an author, as a coach, as you know me, I worked in executive search, and
Uh-huh.
I worked for Isaacson Miller, which is the largest search firm that did exclusively nonprofit university foundation advocacy work in the country. And I was there for about 5 years. I really learned from the best and the brightest how to do this work really well. But then I had a moment of rage where I realized that I could do it faster and smarter and with more authenticity and integrity and more profits for me and less, expense for the customers,
Yeah.
putting mission first and profit second, so that profit eventually came. And I left and I started my own firm, and I had that. I lived this S curve. And when I had been there for about 10 years, we grew the firm. We were, I had 30 staff. We were doing searches all over the world. I turned to my business partner, who came in at about year 4, when I was, realizing what wasn't clicking was the people management. And I brought somebody in who could bolster that. And I remember turning to her at year 10, and I said, I haven't learned anything new in a while. and I think it's time for me to go. I think we should have a plan. Like, we disrupted the market in a way that that we had spawned competition, which is like the greatest compliment. And I realized that the company needed somebody who was super geeked out about the work, and I
Mhm.
wasn't. I was super geeked out about innovation. And when you're an entrepreneur, when you start something and then you grow something and then you have to maintain something, but what you really want to do because you're an entrepreneur is like innovate and iterate and grow and experiment. But your people are like, stop. Can we just take it out on the road and see how fast we can drive? Like,
Mhm.
stop with the new things. There becomes almost this like inherent divorce that begins to happen because I realized that my job
Mhm.
as the CEO was to be 12 to 18 months in front of the market, figuring out the solutions to the problems that the market didn't even yet realize it had. If I was really good at my job, I was 18 months, maybe 24 months if I was firing on all cylinders. If my team was really good at their job, firing on all cylinders, they were worrying about this search, this presentation, this client, this candidate today in their, 1 week, 1 month, maybe over the course of this quarter,
Mhm.
maybe.
Mhm.
So the better
Mhm.
they got at their work, the more dialed in they were to today. And the better I got at my work, the more dialed in I was to tomorrow, and we were not in the same space. And so I needed, for like that realization that I wasn't learning new things and I wasn't the kind of leader that the company needed really was for me that nudge where it was like,
Mm.
yeah, this is like I could stay there forever, but I'd be bored. And what I noticed is when I would go into potential clients and I would pitch the work, I loved it. I loved what we were doing. I loved my team. I loved the work. And they would often say, "You seem like you have the best job in the world." And I said, "Of course I do. I work with the greatest people on earth. I have the greatest clients on earth. We're changing the world. It's incredible." And I started to notice that I became less and less enthusiastic. And I was complaining to a
Mm.
friend of mine. I was saying, I'm sick of the pitch. And he's like, no, he's like, you're just bored of winning. It just isn't hard anymore for you. And
Oh,
so I think that's
so top of the curve. That's
so
so top of the curve.
I think what
Absolutely.
happens, like, when you're at the top of the curve is you don't bring the energy anymore. So is it
No.
any I mean, I think it's a long story to say. I think that your hypothesis is a good one because I think you can tell when somebody's just not in it, when they're just not
Mhm.
that excited.
Mhm. Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what I loved about your story, I mean, in part because it's your story, so that's fun to hear. And from a teaching standpoint, is this reminder is it's not that you didn't love the people you were working with. It's not that you didn't fundamentally love everything about this, but just that your brain was saying, I am not learning anymore and I need to learn. So I'm going to have to figure out what I'm going to do. I do I refashion this so that I can stay here, or is it time for me to go elsewhere and not dial it in like you said?
Yeah, I'm
So
pretty
good.
sure that if I had stayed, I would have done a lot of self-destructive things. I would have
Mm,
gotten pissy at the staff who I loved because they
yeah,
weren't jumping and growing and, all
right.
excited about my innovative ideas. I wouldn't have been as excited in the pitching, so we wouldn't have
Mhm.
sold as much work. I mean, I just like I would have self-sabotaged and I
Yeah.
would have sabotaged the company. And so
Well,
I think that's why I think your hypothesis is spot on.
right. And that's why it becomes the plateau can become a precipice because we stop trying. We naturally disengage. And even if we don't mean to, we just do because our brains want that we're meant to grow. And so if you're not growing, you're going to find a way to do it. And if you don't allow yourself to grow, then like you said, you grow in other ways, but it's self-sabotaging sorts of destructive ways.
So
Very
I th
interesting.
I think when we're at the top of the S curve, I mean, for me, I described my need to leave as it was like I was almost like I was having organ rejection. Like every
Mhm.
part of my body was it wasn't working anymore. Like
Yeah.
what was
Yeah.
working before didn't work anymore. But I'd surrounded myself with people who did what I did for a living, all of my colleagues, whether they were in the firm or outside of the firm. My husband knew me for 20 years as an executive recruiter. My kids, that's all they knew. My parents, my sister, my cousin, like everybody who was close to me, my friends, that's all they knew. So I think sometimes you get to the top of the S curve and you run into like an old friend at a coffee shop or something and you say, "Hey, I'm leaving my company." And they go, "Oh my God, what are you going to do next?" And you go, "I don't know." And they
Right.
look at you with this like look of horror and fear
Exactly.
because it's scary. So you were a music major in college, then you went to Wall Street, you became an analyst for Merrill Lynch, then you left that because you came you came across Clayton Christensen and you ended up working with him and helping build his firm. So you have had a lot of these moments where you have been
Mhm.
on one path and you've switched
Yeah.
to another.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do we do that when we have so many people around us who maybe they love us, maybe they're jealous, maybe it's fear, their own fear, not yours.
Mhm.
Oh my God, you can't do that. It's like, oh my
Mhm.
God, I couldn't do that.
Mhm. Mhm.
How have you made all those leaps? And I know you mentioned therapy earlier, so we don't need to go deep into the couch, but if you want to go there, let's talk
Yeah,
about that. How do you go
that's
from the
so
top of the
funny.
S curve back to the bottom?
Yeah. Oh, I love that, Laura. So one thing I would say is, yeah, definitely when I left Wall Street, as you said, I was an equity analyst. I left to become an entrepreneur. I didn't
And
immediately.
you weren't just an equity analyst, you were exceptionally successful at it.
Yeah.
So
Oh,
you
yeah.
were
I was
good.
really good at it.
Right.
Yeah, I was good at it. I was an institutional investor ranked analyst in two different categories in the emerging markets. I was very good at what I did. But I do remember my boss when I announced that I was retiring, when I was leaving, retiring, she said to me, "You're going to regret this. Like,
Biggest
what are you
mistake you'll ever
doing?"
made.
Exactly. Yeah, pretty close. I'm like, no, I'm pretty sure I won't. Like, I mean, I didn't say that, but so I do think that there is that element of it. So there are a couple of things I would say, Laura, on that. Number one is that whenever we make a move, a self disruption move, there's this calculus that we're doing that not everybody can see. So if you go to jobs to be done theory, whenever you take a job, you're hiring a job to do a functional job for you and an emotional job. So the functional job is you're going to make money, you're going to put food on the table, you're going to build wealth, etc. Well, the emotional job is, am I enjoying this? Do I feel satisfied? Do I feel fulfilled? Am I learning and growing and developing? And so when you make those moves that everybody thinks you have lost your mind, it's because even though the functional piece of it is still happening, the emotional piece, the emotional cost has actually become very high for you to
Mm,
stay. And so you make the decision to disrupt yourself. So that leads to the next question that you asked is, how do we make that transition more smooth for the people that we care about? Part of what we need to do is be willing and able to talk them through what is going on with me emotionally. And so that's part of the way the S curve helps you is you can talk. It gives you this language to talk about growth and say, well, I'm actually at the top of my S curve. And if I don't do something different, I am going to die inside. I'm going to be unhappy. I'm going to self-sabotage. And that is not the person that I want to be. And frankly, it's not the person you want me to be if you're thinking about your loved ones and friends and family. So I think that opens up the conversation. But then there's a secondary conversation that I think needs to be had, which is, if it's with your family, for example, and all of a sudden you've been making a lot of money and now you're not going to making a lot of money, they're afraid. I mean,
mm,
this means
mm.
this impacts them. So a couple of things there. One, I always thought about what not to wear for people who have ever watched that with Stacey London and Clint. I can't remember his last name. Stacey London. And, they would go and they'd have this big makeover and then they would come back. And I always wondered what's happening now. This person looks different. They
Yes.
look fabulous. But now they look a lot more fabulous than they did. And so what's the dynamic in those relationships after that? And so I think that there's also this feeling of, if you go do this other thing, apart from sort of the near term, what does this mean for us financially, for example? What is that going to mean for our relationship? How does it
Yes.
change? And so we manage that. And so basically, one other thought, and then I'll then toss the ball back to you, is that when you jump to a new S curve, you are actually asking everyone else around you to jump to a new S curve as well. And so the question you want to ask yourself is, okay, I've packed a parachute for myself. I know that I've got to do this new emotional job. How can I pack the parachute for the people around me? For the people that I love, that I care about, how can I make it not seem so scary for them so that they feel like we're doing this together? We're jumping to this new S curve together.
It's such a challenge because often the jump has so much to do with identity. Um,
Hmm.
I was listening to a talk you gave a couple of years ago, and I remember you were describing it as something like it's like when a snake sheds its skin
Oh,
so that it
yes.
could grow a new one, right? Or
Hmm. Hmm.
I grew up in Miami, and so I immediately thought of
Oh.
how you would find empty conch shells because the conch would get too big and would have to find a new home, and
Mhm.
and that which it sheds is the thing that defines it.
Hmm.
So I've always been fascinated by this idea of identity. And when we reinvent ourselves, when we disrupt ourselves, we are creating a new identity. Again, we take some of the
Yes.
vestiges from the past, we new stuff together, and there's like an alchemy that happens, and voila, here comes
Hmm.
the new us. But we do it willingly. So the bringing other people along with us, sometimes they're not ready. Sometimes they're
Right.
resentful. Sometimes
Right.
you bring them somewhere that they don't want to go. And that's a challenge, especially over relationships, marriages, things that take,
Yeah.
long periods of time. Um, so as you're thinking, are there ways to start maybe socializing the idea with the people around you? Because
Yeah.
I think something that happens is we tell people our ideas, our big, hairy, scary
Uh-huh.
goals, and they go,
Yeah.
and they pop the balloon
Uh-huh.
before we've even really thought it all out. I think one of the biggest killers of creativity and big ideas is talking about them too early. And yet,
Hmm.
I think one of the best ways to punch ideas out and make them better is to talk them through. So it's like you have to find that sweet spot in the when do you start bringing other people into it and who is in that inner circle that you bring in at times. Like I know that I would bring my husband in at a different time than I would bring my parents in, at a different time than I'd bring my
Hmm.
friends in. There's certainly a different time than I would bring a boss in or people who work for
Right.
me.
Right, absolutely. Those are great questions. So I think the first thing, I mean, you've actually answered your question with the question. But the first thing is that we want to make sure it's safe. I mean, we only can really disrupt well when in an environment where we feel safe to talk about what we're doing, et cetera. So I think that becomes a given. And if at some point it's no longer safe, then we may not want to continue to be with those people. I mean, that's a that's a risk. I mean, presumably or hopefully we have partners that are with us in it, but it's not always the case, and so we have to make those tough decisions. What I would say though is in terms of priming the pump. You said you have children. I have children. It's so easy for us with our children, and I think this is a good lesson for us with them and with anybody is to say, okay, it's time to leave right now. And they're like, wait, what? It's not
Right.
time to leave right now. You didn't tell me we were going to leave.
I didn't have any
And
transition
so
time.
right, there's no transition time, and none of us like to not have transition time. You don't, I don't. We all wanna know, okay, in an hour, this is gonna happen, and then we're gonna go do the next thing. Our brains need time, our emotions need time to adjust. And so one of the things I think can really make a difference, which is hard because we're balancing, we wanna be able to just say whatever we wanna say, is to say, "Hey, I'm thinking about X. What could that look like? Maybe in a year or two." And so you just start putting it out there so that our family can start to adjust to the idea of, oh, she might go do that, or oh, he might go do that. Again, that's hard to do because in a family, or your loved ones generally, you want to be able to just say whatever you want to say whenever you want to say it. But if in fact you're going to do, I mean, I can think about when we were on vacation, I wanted to do this whole exercise around the Enneagram, right? And if I had just said, hey, let's do this right now, this is so fun and so exciting, they would all been like, oh, I don't want to. Instead, I said, okay, so tomorrow we're going to do this. Will you all take the test? And then, an hour before, hey, at 10 o'clock, we're going to sit down and do this. And I think it's the same with when we jump to new S. That's an S curve, right? But sort of bigger ones, we just start to preview what's coming next so that they are able to emotionally and intellectually transition to the new thing that we are doing.
Are there mini S curves within the larger S curve?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if you think about it, it's a fractal, right? Our life is an S curve. Our career is an S curve. Every job is an S curve. And if you wanted to, in fact, I think it's possible to think of our day as an S curve, right? You've got the beginning, the middle, the end, and you want to just get yourself into the sweet spot of the S curve for as long as possible. So yes, there are S curves within S curves, within S curves.
Yeah, yeah. And the other thing I think that's interesting is so in my book Limitless, I wrote about how we're handed the scorecard of success by other people and we achieve it. We do all the things, we lean in, we do everything, hustle harder, rise and grind, all the stuff, and then we get to the top and we're like, is this all there is? Like, was this it? Is this all I'm meant for? Because by the time you get there, you've learned so much about yourself along the way that there's
Mhm.
there's more. You realize that there's more in there. And so I talk about over the course of 20 years and interviewing thousands of leaders, it wasn't success that gave people happiness. It was consonance. It was this alignment,
Mm.
this flow, when they had a calling they cared about, when their work connected to that calling, when the work contributed to their life in some way that allowed them to manifest their values or have the lifestyle that they want or the career trajectory they needed, and then some element of control of
Yeah.
how much the work connected to their calling and how much it contributed to their life. And it's sort of like a stereo mixing board where you don't
Mm.
need 100% of all of them, but you need a little bit of each. And at every age and at every life stage, you want more or less amounts. So when I was,
Yeah.
21 years old and dropping out of law school to join Bill Clinton's presidential campaign, I had no control whatsoever, but I had calling out the wazoo, right? So, now I've got an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old, and we're in the middle of a pandemic dealing with, first loves and romances and college admissions. I need loads of control, right? Like, it's a totally different story. But one of the things that I thought was interesting in the people that I interviewed for the book is that some of them needed less of each of these things at work and they needed more of each of these things at home. So there was a story I
Mhm.
told in the book about somebody who realized he had consonance at work. He just didn't have consonance at home. And in order to
Mm.
get that, he actually got divorced and got remarried. And it's like, boom, everything in his life is in alignment. So I do think there are these moments where you may be on an S curve in your work, but
Oh, yeah.
not so, you think you're in an opposite in your life.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges. I mean, if you'll hear I'll sometimes have people say to me, "Well, I think that so and so, we need to have them do something new." And I'll say, "Well, why?" And they'll say, "Well, because they've been in this role for a long time." Are they doing a good job? Are they enjoying their work? Do they feel like you feel like they're really showing up? And they're like, yeah. Like then they're still in the sweet spot. And it may be, and you sometimes see this happen where they want to just stay in that role for a long time and they're doing a good job because they're dealing with lots of other S curves in other parts of their lives. And so the challenge comes when you've got, you're at the launch point of the S curve at work, at home, personally, that's when it gets overwhelming for people. And that's part of what happened last year with the pandemic is that, usually on a team, you're going to have, some people at the launch point, the sweet spot and the high end. And when the pandemic hit, the entire world was at the launch point of the S curve. And all of
Mhm.
us are like, I don't know how to do this. And so yes, you can be on different S curves in different parts of your lives. And as from a world perspective, we were all at the launch point a
Yeah,
year
I had
ago right
somebody.
now.
Yes, yes. I had somebody who worked for me who was exceptional at the work, and she was unmarried, didn't have any kids. She was so good at the work, and she was rising and growing and thriving, and we were promoting her, and then she got married, and then she got pregnant, and we still wanted to keep pushing her and promoting her, and she was like, "No, like, I am good where I am. I'm going to spend the next, 5 to 6 years having babies. When they are in kindergarten, I'm ready to keep growing again, but I will be an expert in this position, period."
Mhm.
And I remember feeling so disappointed. Like, she has so much potential, and I
Mhm.
wanted it more than her. But what I didn't
Yeah.
realize, because I didn't understand the S curve then, I know it now, is that she was on a huge S curve in the other part of her life. And so she
Mhm.
was like, I want to be an expert over here. Great. Because I don't know what the hell I'm doing over here.
Right,
Right.
exactly, and that ended up anchoring her, right?
Yes.
Because she was an expert at work, that anchored her to go do all that hard stuff at home.
Exactly, and I will tell you, when her kids were older, when they were in school, she continued to grow. She ended up, being
Mhm.
promoted. She's thriving. She's still there. She's great. Even I've left the firm 5 years ago. But she's, one of the senior people there, and it's incredible.
Mhm.
But I think it takes a lot of self-awareness.
Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, it does. And some things we do intuitively. I mean, I think about when I left Wall Street, you know, people have said, "Well, were you really calculated in what you did?" And I'm like, "No, not so much." I mean, I think I've learned that because now I've got the theory, but sometimes we just make those leaps because we know we have to. And it's this vast intuitive leap that we know we have to make. And then later we figure out, oh, here's what I did, here's what's happened. So it
Yes.
does take self-awareness, but it also sometimes we just have to trust our trust ourselves.
Yes. Although sometimes there are opportunities and you can't say no, right?
Right?
So you get to know Clayton Christensen. He asks you, he wants to start this
Uh-huh.
fund.
Yeah.
You are the person. I interviewed Sally Krawcheck last week and she
Uh-huh.
was like, yeah, sometimes you just get fired twice on the cover of the Wall Street Journal, and you're putting mascara on one day and you're like, you know what, this is horseshit and things should be different and women should have more of a voice and they should know how to invest. And you're like putting on your mascara and you're like, wait, I'm the only one who can do this. So you have to do it, right? It's like, I have CEO experience. I have Wall Street credibility. I
Yeah.
understand the whole world. I'm a woman. Like, it's like, this was the moment.
Right. She had
She's
to
like,
do it. Yeah.
she had to
Yeah.
do it. She had to do it. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
the book that I'm writing next, for which I'm doing these interviews as research, is about this moment when you're like, I guess I got to do it, right? Like there's something bigger that's out there and I
Mhm.
can't not do it now that I realize, because I think there is a moment that you realize that you're made for more or that there is more
Mhm.
potential and you see it and you can't unsee it. So when I was interviewing, when I was doing search, the internal candidate who didn't get the job would always leave. And it's not because we didn't treat them
Always.
well. Always. It's not because we didn't treat them well. It's not because they didn't get their day in front of the search committee. That was one of the things that
Fascinating.
we prided ourselves on. In fact, a lot of those candidates would leave, become the CEO of somewhere else, and then hire us to do search for them. Like we treated them very well. But just the very process of imagining that you could be in the position above, literally wearing the clothes, doing the interview, having to solve problems, thinking like them, talking like them, whatever the
Mhm.
process is, but
Mhm.
imagining yourself in that role, seeing yourself in that role and
Yeah.
acting as if you're in the role is something you can't unsee. So I'm
Mhm.
interested in this moment when people get to the top of the S curve and they have seen the possibility, the glimpse. It's like a portal into what could be, that
Yeah.
they can't unsee it. And I I
Huh.
I would love if you've personally had these moments of wonder hell where you're like, "You know what? There's more. I'm not quite sure how to do it, but I know I have to." Or if
Yeah.
you've studied people who have been in this place or can relate it to the S curve in some way, I just wanna turn and start
Yeah.
talking about this potential you.
Yeah, it's such an interesting question, Laura, and I definitely have not framed it that way, and it's fascinating hearing you describe it because there's a piece of me. So I have a couple of thoughts. One is that I remember, um, working with Clayton, and we're doing this fun, but then he's lecturing all over the world, giving speeches to thousands of people. And I remember one of our colleagues saying to me about Clayton, he's like, he's kind of a rock star, right? He goes, people listen to what he has to say. They think this is fantastic. And I don't know that I thought this consciously, but I do think there was a piece of me that said, I want that.
Yes.
I want that. And so, but what's interesting for me, and I wonder as you're writing this book, is that even though I thought that I wanted that, there's also a piece of me that's afraid of it, like really afraid. And so one of the quite, like I can't quite look at it. Like I almost can't see it because it terrifies me too much. And so, I think there's a peak over there that I could go climb, but I can't look. Like I thought about it, but I can't look. I thought about it, but I can't look. And so I wonder, and maybe that's why it's wonder hell, is that it's not, there's a moment of wonder, and the actual hell isn't how am I going to do it? The hell is I'm terrified and I want to, but I don't know if I can. So I'm going to pretend like I didn't see it. That's one of the things I'm wondering.
Yes. I think I am. I think it's sort of, it almost comes down to compartmentalization. So
Mm,
if you're at the bottom of a peak of mountains and you look at the top
yeah.
and you're like, I want to go there. But what do
Yeah.
you see when you get like halfway up to the scenic
Mhm,
overview? You see that the top of
mhm.
the mountain you're going to isn't the top. There's like
Right,
10 more peaks and you're like, I
right.
actually want to go there. And the first
Yeah,
thing you think about is how much water do I have? Did I bring enough trail mix? Like, do I have the snacks? Have my, did I get enough sleep? What's the day? How much daylight do I have left? And you start husbanding your resources,
yeah.
but you don't quite dare to dream like, "I can get there." You're just like, "Well, I'll see where I am in another hour. I'll see where I am in another
Mhm.
hour." Like, put it over there as like, it's a goal that's interesting, but I don't wanna attach myself to the outcome yet because it's a literally a bigger mountain than I've ever dared to climb.
Mhm.
And I think the part of the idea of Wonder Hell is that it is so incredible and amazing and wonderful that you've gotten to where you are. And also you are so filled with anxiety and doubt and insecurity and uncertainty
Yeah.
that it's hell, right? It's wonderful and it's hell. It's Wonder Hell. But what I'm fascinated about Wonder Hell is that when you get to the next peak and the next peak and the next peak, what do you see? You just see more adventure because the view keeps changing, you
Yes.
know, so
And
you
get
surround
and getting better, right?
and getting better.
And
And
getting better.
some people say, I know that the view is better. I don't want it right now, right? Because I'm at this place where I want to like, I'm gonna harder part of my S curve somewhere else.
Mhm.
Or
Mhm.
you go and you go, I actually really want that. I didn't
Mhm.
realize I
Mhm.
wanted it, and I didn't know if I was allowed to want it. I didn't even know it existed, but now that I know. And
Mhm.
as women, you know, of course, we're told not to be ambitious, right? Ambition is
Right.
a bad
Right.
word. I
Exactly.
got a like
Exactly.
whole thing about ambition not being a dirty word that I won't go into here because I think we are, you know, aligned. But I can tell you that the people who come to me for advice, who have these crazy, big, hairy, scary goals, the
Mhm.
ones that talk about them almost in like a whispered tone because they're so excited, they have reverence for the goals. They're so
Uh,
big. Those are the ones I know who are gonna do it, 'cause they understand the
Interesting.
work that is gonna go into it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. The
So
reverence. Yeah,
when you
that's
were
beautiful.
there and you were like, "I kinda want that too, but I don't
Mhm.
wanna look at it," what were you doing over here? Were you putting in the, like, "These are the pieces I know are necessary for that?"
Yeah, I think, and that's one of the things I think is interesting is that we're doing a lot of this stuff subconsciously, right? Because it's too scary to say, I'm doing it. We just start to do it. So I think about, when I was still working with him, I had written my first book. When I was still working with him, I published, Disrupt Yourself in HBR. When I think I also gave a couple of my first speeches when we were working. So I was already doing that. And I think also, actually, let me back up a little bit. I'm thinking about when I first realized I wanted to work with Clayton, but it was subconscious, right? I remember I reached out to him, I'd heard him speak, I sent him a whole Wall Street research report that I'd written, sent it to him and said, hey, super impressed, just wanted to share that. What was I doing? I was interviewing for a job, right? When I sent that to him. When
Yes.
I left Wall Street, I didn't take any of my models, my Excel spreadsheets, I didn't take any of them with me. Why did I do that? Because I knew I was burning the bridges. I wasn't
Mhm.
going back. So I do think that there is some element of it that we do, we're putting the pieces in place, but we don't even quite know that we are. So that when we are ready to jump, we're in a place that we can. The other thing that I have found for me that's made a big difference is, and you said you had brought in a business partner at your prior firm. I have a business partner. And so one of the things that happens is that when I'm like, I don't know if I can climb this, this looks too scary. She's like, yeah, we can climb it. We're going to do it. Let's do it. So you bring in people around you who you're able to say, I'm thinking about this, and like, oh yeah, no, that mountain that's 5,000 feet. No, you can climb 15,000. And so that's another thing that I know that I have done when I get into that wonder hell, surround myself with some people around me. They're like, yeah, like you're not thinking big enough. Like go climb a bigger mountain. And so that's the other thing that so afraid to look at it, do some things subconsciously. And now in the last couple of years, I've gotten much better at surrounding myself with some people who will encourage me. My husband, my family, they're the truth tellers. They just love me no matter what. And then professionally, I find some people who are like, actually, that mountain's not big enough. Go climb a bigger mountain.
Yeah, there is something to be said for people who don't let you settle for mediocrity.
Yeah.
I am friends with Carrie Lorenz, who is the first female F-14 fighter pilot for the U.S. Navy, and I called her up and asked her if she'd blurb my first book, and she read it, and she called me a few days later, and she was like, "Hey, can we talk about your book?" And of course, naive me, I was expecting praise. And she was like, "Listen," and I'm gonna curse a blue streak here, but this is a direct quote. She goes, "Listen, Laura," she goes, "you're really fucking smart, and your book is really fucking good, but you're too fucking smart just for your book to be really fucking good. It needs to be really fucking great. Go make it really fucking great, and then I'll blurb the shit out of it." And I was like, "Ah, you're right.
That's the best thing
Okay."
ever, right?
Best thing ever. And then, and you'll appreciate this as a speaker. She spent 45 minutes on the phone with me. Those 45 minutes in between sound check and when she went on stage, which is, valuable
Wow.
time. Yes.
Right,
She
right.
was like, valuable time. She spent 45 minutes walking me through exactly where the problem was. And I was like, that's it. Like I knew it was like 90% there, but I couldn't quite do it. And then she was
Mhm.
like, this is it. There you go. And it was like she just didn't let me settle for mediocrity. She was like, you are
Oh,
better than this. You can
what
do
a
it. So
gift.
it's
What a
such a
gift.
gift. I actually sent out my newsletter this morning talking specifically about your inner circle. And, we know the Jim Rohn quote that
Uh-huh.
that you're the average of the 5 people you keep
Right.
closest to you. Although fascinatingly, I didn't know this, but if you have people who are closest to you emotionally, they don't have to be physically close to you, but emotionally are
Mm.
overweight, you are 57% more likely to be overweight. Like they don't even have to be proximate, which I thought was fascinating. So the inner
Oh,
circle thing
oh.
is a really important thing. But then I love the John Wooden, the basketball coach John Wooden, who said you will never outperform your inner circle, which is, I think, even better. So one of the things that you were doing was you were changing your inner circle. Right. So
Mm.
you
Mm.
because you saw him the way that he was speaking, the way that he worked with people, the way that he did his research, the way that he would prep for things. Even if it was subconscious, you were still changing the way that you operated towards this goal because you were watching him do
Yeah.
it.
I love that. Absolutely. That's a great insight. And I hadn't heard that quote. So thank
Yes.
you for sharing that. I'm learning something new around that. Fascinating. You change it. What, say the John Wooden quote
John
again,
Wooden,
just
you'll
so I can
never
remember.
outperform your inner circle.
Oh, so good.
Yeah.
So
So,
good.
I mean, I think your inner circle has to have someone that you mentor because you gotta feel like you know what you're doing, right? That
Mhm,
helps to
mhm,
to to ensure it's
mhm.
gotta have a peer because we all like to have, the pity party every once in a while and be in the struggle bus together. But then, people who you aspire to. And I think
Mhm,
if only the people in your inner circle are your average,
mhm.
you're not gonna have somebody who's like, "No, Whitney, 5,000 feet's not it's not enough
Yeah.
for you. You got more in
Right.
you."
Right. Right. So good.
When you do your coaching, how much of the coaching that you do is around framework building, and helping people figure out where they are on the S curve? And how much of it is just, like, looking at them and saying, "You can do this.
Yeah.
I believe in
Ah,
you. You can do more," and them going, "Oh, I can do this. She
yeah.
believes in me. I can do more."
Yeah, Laura, I would say, from a framework perspective, it's not, it's, probably 10 or 15, maybe 20%, but it's a foundational 10 or 20% of like,
Mhm.
here, here's how we're going to look at the world. Here's the model through which we are seeing the world. But then it's, once we've got that model through which we're seeing the world, then it's, okay, you could do more, you could be more. How are you going to do it? How can I support you in doing that?
Yeah, I think frameworks are so key. Albert Einstein said that all knowledge is experience, and I believe that. I believe that in
Mhm,
my core. If you haven't
mhm.
experienced something, you don't truly know it. But I think that if
No.
all knowledge is experience, then I think all wisdom is framework. Because you could come at somebody with a wall of smarts, but if you don't give them a framework through which they can operate and
Yeah.
operationalize it into their own lives, they're like, "Oh yeah, that's really smart," and then they keep doing the same thing they're doing because
Right.
the change feels overwhelming.
Right.
So the what I love about the S curve is that you have created a framework for people to say, "Oh, I get it." Like going from I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing, I don't know what I'm doing, suddenly something clicks. I've got this. I'm in
Mhm.
the sweet spot. It's working. I know I can get better, but I know where to go for my resources to I'm getting a little bored and I'm not getting that much better and I want to try something at the
Yeah.
top of my game. We think if I start again, I'm just going to the bottom and I have to like fight. But what you're
Mhm.
saying is there's another S curve, right? Like
Right.
you go there
Right.
and you work
Yeah,
and then you keep
you're
going.
here. It's not like Groundhog Day. It's not like doom. It's like doom. Right. Yeah, I mean, you just keep going up. So it's totally, yeah, exactly. It's a continuous pathway to your potential.
And do the S curves does the hard part get shorter because you can transfer knowledge of sort of how you learn and you have
Yes.
other people around you?
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, a great example of this is that, so in December, one time I've left my house sort of in a big way 2 times in the last year. The one time is we decided we were gonna go on vacation in Tortola and go sailing. I had some friends that were gonna do this. They were willing to do it at a very reasonable rate, like, "Let's go do it." So, so I started to realize, okay, I love the idea of vacations, but I'm actually really bad at taking vacations
Oh,
because
same.
I don't know how to unwind. I don't know how to relax. I don't know how to unplug. And so I actually approached the vacation as an S curve. I said, in fact, I wrote a piece about it. How do you jump to the S curve, or how to jump to the S curve of vacation, which you can download if you want. It's whitneyjohnson.com/vacation. And basically said to myself, okay, I'm going on a vacation. I don't know how to do this. I'm jumping to a new S curve. I'm going to be awkward. I'm going to be uncomfortable. It's going to just be really hard. And then when I did that, I was allowing myself to be awkward and uncomfortable. And then that allowed me to move up the S curve a lot faster and actually have one of the best vacations I've ever had.
And did you tell your husband, your friends, were you like, I'm gonna suck at this in the beginning
Yes,
and I
I
might be
did.
super cranky and I'm freaked out and stressed out
I
and
did. I did. And I said, and I put in backstops of like, hey, people on my team, if you need to get a hold of me, don't contact me because I am really unplugging, but I'll give you my husband's email because he's not obsessed like I am around this. He won't perseverate. And then with my family, I said, okay, yeah, this is the commitment I'm making, but I'm going to ease into it. I'm going to have a couple days in advance where I'm still kind of on, but then I'm off. Yeah, I talked them through it.
you pre-vacationed. I like
I
that.
pre-vacationed.
I've always had a really hard time tuning out, and I used to think it was just because I love what I do, which is true. I do love what I do.
Yeah.
But I think that there is that downtime that we need in our brain
Mm, mm,
to process and to do the alchemy, right? That I think
right.
we're just not giving ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the research shows that now, like our brains have to have the downtime. And I remember thinking, after it was over, like, oh, I felt so refreshed. I felt so good because I had fully unplugged for 5 days, which I don't think I've done in like 20 years. Like I didn't check my phone once. I didn't check my email once. It was fantastic. And I think what's good about that too, then is, as with you asked the question earlier, do you get better at moving up S curves? And the answer is yes. So now that I unplugged once, I'm like, oh, I did that once. I can do it again.
Yeah.
And so you start to build that muscle.
Yeah. It's like it turns out nothing imploded. It was okay.
No, in fact, you gave everybody else on your team an opportunity to climb their S curve as well because you weren't potentially micromanaging, which I try not to do, but there's always that potential.
Yes, yes. Well, that brings us back to helping everyone else put on their backpacks, right?
Yeah.
When you're
Yeah.
when you're on the backpack. Did your team take bets? Was anybody like, how long until she checks her email? Because I would have put some serious money on that.
Yeah. Yeah, they didn't take bets, but I did my own bet. I actually on my email response, I said, hey, I've committed to unplug for 5 days, and my family's betting that I can't. And if you hear from me, you'll know that they won. So that I basically built in accountability around the process.
Yes. I love that. So my last question for you,
Yeah.
how are your push-ups going?
How are my what's going?
Your push-ups.
Oh, my push-ups. So, I have kind of fallen off on my push-ups. I have not been doing so I haven't like, oh, now you're going to be like, now I'm like, oh, I've got to go back and do push-ups. My goal over the past year and a half has been focused on running.
Oh,
So
okay.
I had set a goal beginning of, well, actually, no, 2 years ago to be able to run a 5K. And so now I actually run 2 days a week for 45 minutes and I'm at 3.4 miles an hour. So I run and walk and run and walk. I shouldn't apologize for that, but I just did. So I can run a 5K. And when I started, I was running like 5 minutes. So that's been my big goal, is to run.
I love that. I love that. I ran my first mile of my life when I turned 39, and it
Uh-huh.
took me 6 weeks to be able to run the mile without stopping, and as
Yeah.
soon as I finished, I was like, "If I string 3 of these together, I could do a 5K." So it took me
Uh-huh.
6 more weeks and I did a 5K, and then at the end of that, I was like, "If I string 2 of these together, I could do a 10K," and I say do, not run, because, like,
Uh-huh.
literally men with double joggers were passing me on the uphills, so,
Right, 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 right,
I
right.
did it.
But it doesn't matter. You just finish.
It doesn't matter, and then when I finished the 10K, I was like, "If I string 2 of those together, I could almost do a half marathon," and of course, I live in Boston. Fast forward 3 years, I've now run Boston for charity because 'cause I'm slow, twice. So, but
Oh,
that's
that's
the S curve.
fantastic.
That's the S
Yeah.
curve, right? Because you, like, get to
Yeah.
this point and you were like, "Oh," and then you get there and you're like, I want more." So you go
Uh-huh.
back to the bottom and you figure it out again. So,
You've run the Boston Marathon twice. That's fantastic. Well
yeah, it's
done.
well, I ran walk the Boston Marathon, but you know
Uh-huh.
what? I have the same medal as the person who came in 2nd place.
'Cause you finished.
'Cause I finished, and I raised a lot of money for charity along the
There
way,
you
and,
go.
you
There you
know,
go.
I but it's interesting because we do assign we assign value to
Mhm.
results in a way that I
Mhm.
think sometimes we have to let go of. And,
Mhm.
the day that I ran the marathon, it was 92 degrees, and I had this moment where I was like, I'm either gonna pass out and not finish, or I could just, like, hug every friend and kiss every baby I see along the way, and I could just be mayor of Marathon Town, and a
Is
finish
that
is a
what you
finish,
did?
and that's what I did. Yeah.
Huh.
On my second. On my first, I
Uh,
was much more attached to the outcome.
uh-huh.
It didn't go
Uh-huh.
so well. But again, there's an S
Yeah.
curve there, right? Is, like,
Mhm. Mhm.
understanding, like, why you're doing something, not
Right.
apologizing for it.
Right. Huh. Fascinating. I love that, mayor of Marathon Town.
Mayor of Marathon
That's
Town.
fantastic.
Yes. Yes, yes. So, where can people find you? I've got it scrolling below, but when we're going to
Oh.
strip this and make it into a podcast, so if people are listening on
Oh.
audio.
Yeah, so I think the best place, like I said, if you wanna do that download around the vacation, how to take a vacation, you can go to whitneyjohnson.com/vacation. I think that's the best way, or just whitneyjohnson.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. I've really appreciated this
Yeah.
conversation.
Oh, it was very fun, Laura. Thank you. You're an amazing interviewer.
Oh, well, I should be. I spent 20 years doing it, so I should know.
You're an
Um,
expert at the S curve, and you just moved to other S curves.
yes, now I have to figure out how to write it all up, which puts me right back to the bottom of my S curve.
There
So
you
this
go. But you
talking
will.
I can do. Synthesizing, thinking, little harder.
I love it. I love it. Oh,
Thank you
excited
so
for you.
much.
Yeah,
Okay.
take care.